Hello, first grade. This is your friendly neighborhood art teacher with your next project. Now, some of you I gave a hint to your next project. I said it was messy, it involved dirt, and that you had something cold on the way. So messy, dirt, and cold were your three clues if you heard me say that. If you didn't, can you guess what we're about to do? I have a clue. It involves a special kind of dirt called clay. That's right, our next project is our clay project. Now, you guys did some clay in kindergarten with a pinch pot, and remember, we got a ball of really brown gray clay, and we did pinching, and most of your teachers grew a flower with you in their classroom, so we made pots to grow your flower in. This year, we're doing something a little bit different. So we're going to start with a pinch pot, and we're going to add just a little tiny something in there to do with cold. Now, before we move on to that part, I want to tell you what makes clay so special. Up in the mountains, usually, those are pretty bad mountains, but you get the idea. Eventually, there comes a rainstorm. So water comes into those mountains. Clouds dump those rain clouds and the rain and the snow and whatever else kind of water happens. But eventually, all of that water starts to gather, and it has to run somewhere. Water likes to run downhill because it doesn't like to be up high. It likes to go to the lowest area it can find. So it starts to wash out, but when it washes out, it takes the dirt with it. So any tiny little pieces of dirt, it actually takes it downriver. Those little tiny pieces of dirt can be a lot of different sizes. The type of dirt we're talking about is called silt, S-I-L-T. Oops, good thing I have a dry erase board, huh? S-I-L-T, there we go. And silt is dirt that's so small, it's smaller than grains of sand. You can't actually see it with your eyes. You'd have to look under a microscope to see it as so small. But silt runs along these rivers, and the river carries it down. As long as it's moving, it'll keep carrying it. But eventually what happens is most water tends to start to dump into ponds and lakes. Those ponds and lakes don't move very fast. As a matter of fact, they kind of sit still. So all of that silt that dumps into those ponds and lakes has to go somewhere. It's heavier than water, so if it's not going to move, it's going to drop, and it's going to sink to the bottom. When it sinks to the bottom, it keeps coming, and this water keeps dumping it in, so eventually it creates a big, thick layer of very slippery, stretchy mud called clay. So this layer sits at the bottom of the lake. Clay is actually made in lakes. That's the filter. It filters it out until all of that's left is the tiny little stuff. But all of that clay drops out of the water because it sinks. Well, at some point, usually what happens is the lake either dries up or the river stops flowing and filling it, but eventually, sometimes even dirt fills in over top and grass grows, but the clay gets buried. So it used to be a lake, but it's not a lake anymore. It kind of dries up. At that point, people kind of come along and they say, hey, I think there used to be a lake here. Oh, we did an x-ray of the ground, or we did a sonogram of the ground, or an ultrasound, whatever kind of tools they have. And they come in and they say, hey, we think that there's a layer of clay, so that they'll dig through the dirt and get rid of it. And they go, bingo, we found it. So they're going to take that clay and they're going to dig it out. And they're going to take it to a factory. Or if you find it and you know what you're doing, you can actually do this at home. I don't, so we buy it. But the people in the factory take it and they get all of the sticks and the stones and anything that's not clay out of it. So it's nice, clean dirt. They package it up, and then we buy it at the school and we use it. The very special thing about clay, other than how it comes to be, it's not really made, it's just dug up, is that when you fire it, which means bake it, and when you fire it in a kiln, which is kind of like an oven, the ovens at home that you have are maybe about 500 to 600 degrees. A kiln can get up to 2,000, which means about 4 times what your things can do at home. So if you had the power to do 500 plus 500 plus 500 plus 500, that's how hot a kiln gets. It is incredibly hot. So that clay will actually turn to stone. So when we use it, you're going to get a chunk mostly like this. And this stuff used to actually be at the bottom of some other lake. So this is actually at the bottom of the lake at one point. Your job, you're going to get a cube of this. Now, I've been playing with this under the camera, so you can see mine's all mushy and garbled. Yours won't be like that. I will cut that fresh from the block so it's nice and soft. This one's a little bit drier. But you're going to take that, and you're going to cut a good chunk off of it first. So maybe about half. You'll have to kind of gauge it. Get those little crummies. And you're going to do what you did last year. So you're going to take it, and you're going to either tap, 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 or pat, 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 but you're going to try and roll it. You're going to try and make a ball, a sphere. Remember, it's not a circle. If it's a 3D thing, it's called a sphere. This might be closer to a cube because it's got 6 flat sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this one's going to be a sphere. Remember, you're going to put that on your desk like we did last year. You're going to take your hole puncher, your thumb, and you're going to go almost the whole way through, push, 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 push. And then you're going to take your pot pinchers, and you're going to pinch on the side. Now remember, pinch and turn, pinch and turn. This is not going to be a very big bowl. As a matter of fact, we want it to be kind of shallow. So I'm going to push on the bottom, get it nice and thin. I don't want it to pop through. I don't want a donut. I want a bowl. This one's cracking a little bit. You can see my clay is very dry in comparison to what you guys have because it's getting some nice big cracks. That happens when you stretch even wet clay. So if it happens, you could just mush it back together if it's wet enough. But I want to get a bowl big enough that something can sit inside of it. And I want a bowl that's going to hold. If I poured water in it, don't do that because it will actually make it too soft and it'll fall apart. But I'm going to want to make a bowl that will hold something because that's the next step. This is only part 1. This is the easy part. Your next part is something to do with cold. So the question becomes, what do we do with cold? Well, you just finished a project along the lines of this animal. Can anybody remember what that was? Penguins, that's right. So you guys are going to take the idea of penguins, and instead of drawing or painting them with daubers like we did just a little while ago, you guys are actually going to create a penguin out of clay to sit in your pond. Now, I'm going to take this. Now, if you have a hard time and it's not pulling off of your desk, ask me first because we don't want to rip the bottom. Sometimes if you turn it a little bit and loosen it up, it'll pop right out. Now I'm going to put this over to the side. And I'm going to make a penguin. So I'm going to pinch part off. And I'm going to start by making his body. Oh, that's a little bit too big, so I'm going to pinch again. Or I can take my fork and I can cut with my fork. I just want to make a nice cone. That means a triangle that's round, like an ice cream cone. So I think I'm going to make a cone like that. You can pinch it, you can pull it, you can push it. I'm just rolling on one side, and then eventually it gets narrower and narrower and it becomes a cone that way. So that'll be his body. I need a sphere for his head. So I'm going to get his head in there. I can pinch and pull. I can move this. I'm going to try and get it as best I can. Now I got to get a flat top so I have something to attach to. But I have a problem, first grade. I can't just push these pieces of clay together because you don't know what happens. It will fall apart. There's something special with clay because of how it is and what it's made of that you actually can't push it together most of the time and have it stick. I'm going to show you what I mean here in a minute. I'm going to take my fork and I'm just going to show you with these 2 rough pieces. All right, let's say I wanted to take these 2 pieces and put them together. Most kids will think, okay, I can just mush them together. So they're going to take that and they're going to press as hard as they can. And they say, okay, that's enough. That's going to stick. Well, it might stick a little bit, but look at that. I pushed so hard my hands were shaking, and I can still pull it apart very easy. It's because it's not going to stick like that. What ends up happening is this clay has a lot of water in it. When it dries, that water goes from the clay into the air. It escapes, which means that whatever space the water was having, this clay is going to shrink. It's going to get smaller. So you're going to have those 2 pieces, and they're going to get smaller, and they're going to go right apart. They're going to pop apart. This didn't even get dry, and it's popping apart. What are you going to do? Well, I've had some kids say, well, we can use glue, right? Well, not so much, because remember, this is dirt. If you put glue on dirt, it's just going to fall off. It's only going to stick to the stuff at the top. It's not going to stick to the rest. Or, okay, well, if glue won't work, why can't we glue it right before it goes and it's already dry? Well, glue will burn up in the kiln. Remember, the kiln gets up to 2,000 degrees. Glue doesn't survive. It burns away. So then we have it falling apart again. You have to do something new called slipping and scoring. Actually, it's technically score and slip because you got to do it in that order. So what I'm going to do, instead of having smooth sides, is I'm going to rough them up. I'm going to get them all roughed up. So score isn't like a football game where, yay, score! Football, we got a point. No, not a point at the goalpost or running to the end of the field. Not that kind of score. Score can also mean to scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to scratch it. I don't want to just, that's too light. I did some. You can see I scratched a little bit, but that's not deep enough. And I don't want to go so deep that I cut through it. I just want enough that it roughs up the surface. And I'm going to rough up the surface. But that's not enough. Roughing it up doesn't help. We need something to stick it together and make it sticky. That's where the slip comes in. Slip is actually a clay term. It means clay basically with a lot of water in it. So I'm going to use clay to kind of stick it to itself. This is just water. In this cup, there's just enough to be on the bottom. You can see it's pretty empty. That's all I need. That's actually more than enough. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to dab it. Some kids like to take their fork and do it that way. I think that takes forever. I'd rather use my fingers. So I'm going to take that. You have to be careful though. Don't smooth it, because if you do that, look what happens. You just erased all your score lines. So you got to dab it. You got to make sure that you get that water into those curves. So now what you've done is you've roughed it up. You made them soft and gooey, and then you can stick them together and they're going to stick. So if I put these together and I mush them, especially if it has a couple of minutes to sit and to glue itself and to dry out, it will actually keep it really good. Now I'm smoothing it out just to help it stick, but you're gonna see I'm gonna try and pull that apart, and it's coming a little bit, but I had to work a lot harder, and I bet if I stuck that together and let it sit for a couple minutes, I bet I wouldn't even be able to pull it apart. It might rip over here, it might rip over here, but it won't rip at that seam because it's too strong. So when you're going to attach something, anything that touches as a separate piece has to be scored and slipped. So here, and wherever it's going to touch on the head has to be scored. And yes, they have to be wetted. When wet enough that it's going to stick. I would build your penguin on the table. So you can see he's stuck on there now. Hopefully good enough that his head won't pop off. We don't want that. And then you can start to make wings. So when I make wings, I tend to pinch on one end and make it flat, and pinch and make it round. It's just kind of like a little raindrop. That's basically all I'm doing. I'm making a little raindrop shape, see? That's all. And you can take your finger and you can get rid of any of the cracks if you don't want them to show. If it goes in with a crack, it's going to come out with a crack. So make sure that if you don't like those, that you're smoothing it out. There's a layer two. I've just pinched on this end and I made it flat on that end. So I kind of pinched in two ways and made it round. So I got two raindrops. We don't want to cry in art class. So I want to attach that. Get those score and slip lines in there. I don't have to score it any further than what it's actually going to touch, but I do want to score it. And I want to make sure it's nice and rough and nice and wet. And then it'll stick. So there we go. I can always bend it back if it bends too far. Now here's the thing. This is the reason I'm showing you this video today. A, I want to make sure everybody gets the same information. And B, you're not going to be able to start this today. I know, I'm so sorry. It's such a bummer when I say, oh, it's an instruction day. But here's the thing. You're only going to have one class to do this. Whatever you don't get done, you don't get. So if you only make a dish and you don't get to the penguin, oh man, you only get a dish. You miss out on the fun little penguin. Now if you want to make a pole, let's see, I think we had a penguin or a snowman last year. So you can make a penguin or a snowman. But either way, if you don't get that made, you can't do it. So you got to have the whole 40 minutes that I'm going to see you to build it. I can't keep these wet for a week because they start to grow mold. And mold's not necessarily a good thing. It's not going to hurt you, but it's not going to be very good for your lungs sometimes. Sometimes people are allergic to mold, so we don't want to grow anything more than we have to. A little bit's okay, a lot is not. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one class so that these can dry out and not be moldy. All right, so I've got my beak on. I've got my penguin ready. Now I've got to attach them to the bowl because remember, anything that touches must be scored and slipped. So I have to do it nice and rough. Don't just do one or two. It's okay to rough it up and make it ugly because you will be able to smooth it out a little bit later. So there we go. I think I have just enough water to do this part. If not, I can always go back to the sink and get some more. Don't recommend doing that, but there's only a couple little drips left, so I think we're good with that. And then I'm going to take him and push him. Make sure he's nice and snug in there. If you need to, you can take your finger and you can smooth out those little things that are there, smooth out the cracks in the top, but you're going to want to make sure, see, there's my little penguin, he's so cute. You're going to want to make sure that there is a lot of room, or at least enough that you could get a marble in there, because we're going to do something very special to make him look like he's popping out of a puddle. But I'm not going to tell you what yet. Right now, all we have to be concerned about is the penguin. So the next time you guys come in, we're going to build that in one class, and then I'm going to hand you a paper towel. That paper towel will have a piece of tape on it. That piece of tape, you're going to write your name and your class code. So you might be, instead of kindergarten, you're first grade, so you might be 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. Whatever your class code is, make sure that goes on there, because when these are dry and they're not so wobbly, I'm going to turn them over and I'm going to scrape your name into the bottom so that when they get all mixed up and they get fired in the kiln, I know who they go back to. If there's no name, I don't know who did it, so it's kind of hard to tell. So I just have to give it to whatever kid doesn't have one. If you weren't here that day, then I might build you one, but probably you're going to end up with a bowl. At the very least, you'll be able to decorate something. It may not be a penguin, but it'll be something. So when you're here, one day to build, whatever you get done is what you get. So if you only get a bowl, you only get a bowl. If you only got the penguin, you only get the penguin, but you got to have both in order to do the fun marble part. Once we're all done, we'll be ready to roll. These go back to the counter, and then I will collect them. Now, during cleanup, you cannot take clay home with you. I'm sorry, but it's only mud. You don't have a kiln at home, so really you can't do anything with it, and if it gets wet, it just turns back to mud, so it's no good for you anyway. So no, you cannot take these. We will mush these together and let another student use them so that we have enough for everybody. But you see how dirty my hands are? There's lots of dirt. See how dirty my fork is? There's lots of dirt. See how dirty my cup is? There's lots of dirt. And because of how clay forms, did you remember that the lake, this clay settles in the bottom of the lake? Well, if it's heavy enough to settle on the bottom of the lake, it is heavy enough to clog our pipes. And if we wash our hands and our tools like this with all this gucky stuff on it, it's going to clog our pipes. And then it's going to spend thousands of dollars in order to unplug our pipes and get our drains working again. We don't want to flood. We don't want to make poor Marge and our poor Miss Marge. We don't want to inflict her with unclogging our trap over and over and over again, because this is a messy, messy project. So what we're going to do, and I tell the big kids this, and they go, "Oh, I can't believe you put that in my head again." But it's so catchy that it works, because they say that we go rinsey, 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 and then washy, washy, washy when we're washing up. That means that I'm going to have a bucket by the sink, and you're going to take your cakey clay hands and the cakey clay fork and the cakey clay dish. I'm sorry. I'm misspeaking. I'm tired. But you're going to take all of these things that are really dirty and you're going to rinsey, rinsey, rinsey in the bucket. That way, all of this clay that could clog the sink stays in the bucket. And then once your hands are rinsed, then you can go to the sink and washy, washy, washy. Wash your hands and wash your tools. So rinsey, rinsey, rinsey in the bucket, and then washy, washy, washy in the sink. I know it seems silly to say it like that, but that's the kind of thing that gets in your head and you catch it and you remember it forever, which is why the big kids hate me saying it, because they go, "Oh, no, it's in my head again." But that's the point. We don't want anybody to forget that, because if we forget, there can be big trouble. All right, guys, so the next time you come in, We are going to make our penguins or snowmen. Don't forget, I like you. All right, guys, we'll see you later. I can't wait to start our dirt project with you.